Hi, I'm Grace Laudick, and this is Educating Ourselves in These Difficult Times on ThinkTech Hawaii. Today, we will be discussing the return of college students to campus for the fall 2020 semester at a university in Nebraska amid the COVID-19 pandemic. My guest today is Maria Stevenson, a sophomore at Creighton University, who is majoring in economics. On campus, she is involved with mock trial, Alpha Kappa Delta Psi, as a resume and interview committee co-chair, and the Regulation Silo, which is a student-led research group focused on analyzing U.S. economic regulations. She will be sharing her experiences as a college student in Nebraska and give us some insight into what college life looks like this semester and how Omaha is approaching the pandemic. Thank you for being a guest on my show today, Maria.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
So to start off our show today, I'd like to share with our audience some pictures that you shared with me that I think accurately encapsulates what the experience has been for college students since the spring 2020 semester. So over here, we have a photo of Maria, and this is a time that was pre-COVID, very carefree. This is actually a retreat that she did with AK Psi, and they were actually having an Uno game. Obviously, we have Maria here, very enthusiastic with the game. And as the pandemic begins to progress, we see how the photos have changed as well. So over here, this is a photo of when Maria was actually booted out in March from Creighton University. So the university told the students from Hawaii that they could stay until Wednesday, but then all of a sudden they were told that they needed to be moved out of the rooms by that Monday in order to receive refunds, which I can imagine was a very hectic time. And then this progresses to what life looks like this semester. Over here is a picture of Maria and a few of her friends taking professional pictures for AK Psi. These photos were actually taken a few weeks ago. So this is actually a photo of two bubbles interacting as Maria lives with the girls on the end and the two girls next to her live with each other. And finally, this leads us to our final photo, which features the coronavirus dashboard at Creighton University. This is an online platform where students can get daily health statistics on what the community is looking like at Creighton. So for our discussion today, Maria, I'd like to focus on what life is looking like for you in the fall 2020 semester. I know that most students can agree that the start to any semester can be a very stressful time, but especially during the COVID pandemic, when there's just so much up in the air, I'd love to know what life is like for you at your university and some of the policies and regulations that they're doing to help keep students safe. I'd like to talk with you first about what dorm life has been like for you. What are some of the differences in what dorm life is looking like now in this semester in comparison to the past?
Of course. So when I thought of college, coming in my freshman year, I thought the quintessential, college experience was hanging out with your friends in their room until 3 a.m. And I had a really great time doing that, just watching random movies. And then COVID hit, and now Creighton has been implementing a phase system, essentially, in which there are multiple phases, I believe around three, in which you can't go into any dorm other than your own in the phase that we're currently in, which is phase one. As time progresses and we'll see, how many cases the campus gets, they will change that as to whether, people who live on campus can go to other dorms or if people who live off campus can come in. But as of right now, we are not allowed to go into any dorms other than our own. And we cannot go into any other people's rooms until later, I guess, when they just update us on when we're allowed to have a little bit more freedom in that.
Mhm. I know that some universities across the country have taken major extremes, like making it so that students actually don't have any roommates. Has that been the case for you at Creighton for this semester?
No. Essentially, I have three other suite mates with me. There are four of us living, two to a room. And that it varies depending on which dorm you live in, on how many roommates you have, but they're essentially keeping it the same for people who are living just in a dorm. However, they also have measures set up for those who are exposed to COVID. So, for example, if, say, their suite mate tests positive, they have dorms on campus that are available, as well as they've worked with a nearby hotel, the DoubleTree, in order to allow students to isolate there if need be.
Mhm. What do you think that the impact has been on the social side of college? A lot of people argue that college is just as much social as it is academic. So, how have you seen the social scene at Creighton transformed as a result of the new rules implemented, especially in the dorms?
Absolutely. I honestly, personally have not seen as much of a difference, but for the caveat that I think a lot more people are looking into joining more clubs than they otherwise would, becoming more involved in ways that they wouldn't have time to do if instead they were able to go to the movies with their friends and such. And so right now they're finding different ways to interact with more people on campus when they can't see them face to face.
hmm You mentioned that more people have been joining clubs and organizations, and I know that you're a part of a few clubs on campus, such as the Economics Club as well as Mock Trial. How have those extracurricular activities been conducted since you returned to campus?
Zoom has absolutely been our friend about this. We are actually currently in the midst of our recruitment week for Alpha Kappa Psi, which is a co-ed business fraternity. And so we have had really, really great show out on those Zooms. We're able to better track attendance. But it's also much more difficult in terms of getting to know the people who want to be members, just because it's much harder to, connect names and faces when everything you're doing is across a screen. Additionally, for mock trial, we've seen, I'd say, a little bit less of an increase in how many people are signing up, simply because it is a bit more of a time consuming activity and one where you don't meet as many people. So the social aspect of it isn't as large as AK Psi, for example, which means that I don't think it's drawing in as many people as a result.
Mhm. So many dorms and other areas on campus have common areas. Are these still open so that students can still interact with each other?
They are open to a very limited degree. They have closed, for example, the study rooms because those are much more difficult to sanitize. But the neutral zones, as Creighton calls them, are technically open. However, there are limits as to how many people can sit in them. They've restricted the number of chairs that are allowed, just to make it a little more uncomfortable if anyone does decide to try to break that. So it's less of a social place than it used to be last year for sure, but it's still technically open. I haven't really seen anyone using them so far, though.
hmm At Creighton, what differentiates an area that's considered a neutral space versus a non-neutral space?
Well, I guess most obviously would be the signs. They let you know that this is a place where people of both genders can interact during different times of the day. So, for example, in freshman dorms, uh, it's generally try to keep to your own gender floor, except for when you're in the neutral zone, because it's a much more open space. It's a place where you can make sure that people are being safe. Um, it's still kind of being utilized, but I guess it's just anywhere that isn't in your room, as well as they typically will have seating and study areas for people to do homework there.
hmm In the instance that people do break rules, such as for social distancing or mask wearing, or perhaps going into a zone that they're not supposed to be in, what are the types of consequences that Creighton has put into place in order to regulate these behaviors?
For smaller transgressions like going into a place where you aren't supposed to, not wearing your mask in a friend's dorm, I mostly see warnings at this point in time just because you aren't going to have people who have violated it multiple times and gotten caught. However, there are definitely consequences for larger things. So, for example, if you attend an off campus party, which are much harder to regulate, there are fines, for example. I'm not aware of the current amount because it's been changing as they adapt to figure out how many people are doing it and how many people they need to discourage from attending those parties. So there have been consequences, but they're still developing. They aren't as set in stone as I think I would prefer.
hmm Have you felt comfortable so far with some of the rules and policies set in place by Creighton? Do you think that they're adequate in order to ensure that health continues on campus?
I think that they're certainly doing their best, and this is a very difficult situation. I don't think that there's any best answer. I say that they're doing, the best that they can, but really, do we know what that is? And so, for example, there are different levels of social distancing required for certain classes, depending on how big the rooms are that are available, depending on how many students are in the class, how many chairs, tables, etc. And so personally, I felt that some classes are very well equipped. I've got a class in an auditorium in which I can be very separated from my peers, and I feel very safe in that class. However, there are others in which the rooms, I believe they might have overestimated how much space if they were just looking at plain square footage. But there have been instances in which I feel that the person in front of me is nowhere near 6 feet away, in which the professor just walks up close and, doesn't seem to understand that that 6 feet, separation goes in every direction.
Mhm. And in regards to not feeling safe on campus, are there perhaps any resources or opportunities for students to share with administration that they feel like they're not doing an adequate job of keeping students safe?
Yes, there is a coronavirus response email that any student can email. They could either let administration know if there's a party going on that they don't believe is safe, whether they see a large group of people not adhering to social distancing. There are avenues in which people can report this type of transgressions, and yet I don't think that they're being fully utilized just because we're college students, right? You aren't going to see as many 18 to 20-year olds um, actively emailing to snitch on their friends. And so I guess it's a little difficult to see large numbers of students actually using these.
Mhm. What have been the attitudes of students on campus towards the rules that have been set in place? For example, social distancing, mask wearing, and adhering to certain zones that students are no longer allowed to go in.
I think that many students do absolutely understand that they are necessary. I think that a lot of students, particularly those that had previously been sent home, really value being able to be on campus with their friends, even if it is 6 feet apart. And so I think that overall, the idea is that we understand that it kind of sucks. It's not the best situation, but it's what we have to deal with right now. And those regulations are in place for a reason.
Mhm.
However, I was talking with an RA earlier who has found that, for example, freshmen who were high school seniors last year who didn't experience being sent home don't fully understand the importance of these online or these in-person classes and not having online classes, simply because they hadn't previously experienced what it was like to be sent home at the drop of a hat.
Mhm. For this semester, are all of your classes in person or are you on a hybrid or online format?
So I personally don't have any fully online classes at the moment. That may change depending on whether there's exposure in the classroom, for example, but I currently don't have any experience with it. However, um, I do have some hybrid classes. I definitely have in-person classes with social distancing. And so it depends really on how many people there are and what facilities they have available.
Mhm. In regards to your mentioning of many students going off campus, for example, to go to a party, there's been some coverage on the news about things called COVID-19 parties. Has that been an occurrence at Creighton?
I don't believe that those COVID-19 parties, as they are the ones in which students place bets as to who can get sick the fastest, I don't think that those have been taking place. I haven't heard any reports of that. However, there have been off campus parties that, while they don't have that express goal, can ultimately have very similar consequences. So, those are very hard for administration to regulate. And so, as a result, they've been working on it, they've been trying to find students, and yet it's not necessarily going to be entirely successful because they don't have jurisdiction over that.
Mhm. I would love to continue this discussion with you, Maria, but in a moment, we will actually be taking a short break. Again, I'm Grace Laudick, and you are watching Educating Ourselves in These Difficult Times with my guest, Maria Stevenson. We will be back shortly.
Hi, I'm Rusty Komori, host of Beyond the Lines on ThinkTech Hawaii. I was the head coach for the Punahou boys varsity tennis team for 22 years, and we were fortunate to win 22 consecutive state championships. My show is based on my book, also titled Beyond the Lines, and it's about leadership, creating a superior culture of excellence, and finding greatness. I feature a wide range of amazing guests who share valuable insights about how going beyond the lines leads to success in everything you do in life. I'm looking forward to you joining me every Monday at 11 a.m. Aloha.
Welcome back to Educating Ourselves in These Difficult Times with my special guest, Maria Stevenson. Prior to our break, we showed some photos encapsulating your experience from spring semester until fall semester. The last photo that we featured was actually the coronavirus dashboard for Creighton University. Could you tell us a little bit about this dashboard and how this keeps you updated with what the health is like on campus?
Of course. So essentially this dashboard updates every single Monday. So it provides the information for, the preceding week. Now, this also provides how many students are in isolation, as well as the capacity that the hotel rooms that Creighton is providing. How much space they still have left, how many more students they could take. So this updates once a week. Personally, I would prefer if it was a little bit more often, but ultimately, I think that they're doing a pretty good job of keeping students updated on a very holistic, sense of what they're doing in order to keep us safe.
Mhm. Overall, based on the numbers reflected on the dashboard, has COVID-19 been an extreme issue at Creighton and in the greater Omaha community?
Coronavirus definitely hit Omaha earlier than it started to hit Hawaii. I remember that when I was flying out in March, actually, I was comparing the numbers and there were, only like 30, 40 cases total at the time for both of them. And very quickly, I started to notice that Hawaii had significantly fewer cases on a daily basis as time went on compared to Nebraska as well as Omaha.
Mhm. There's been some coverage on the news as well about politics regarding mask distancing, social distancing, and just the attitudes concerning the pandemic. I know overall, many people in Hawaii have tended to be very cautious, and many people are very adherent to wearing their masks and social distancing. Is it a similar sentiment in Omaha and Nebraska?
I would say that there are definitely people who care about others around them who are willing to wear their mask and social distance. However, I would say that politically, Nebraska is very different from Hawaii. We all know that Hawaii is a very clear blue state and Nebraska is a very red state. And as a result, politics has kind of seeped into this pandemic in multiple ways. So, for example, the governor of Omaha, I was keeping up with this when I was at home. It kind of shocked me because back at home, we'd gotten so used to wearing masks all the time. And when I came back, they had just instigated a mask mandate. Actually, the governor of Nebraska stated that if they were to implement a mandatory, mask mandate, that he would challenge it legally, which means that it took until August 11th, already months into the pandemic, for Omaha to have a mask ordinance. And I think part of that is that, first off, politically, there are large differences, as well as secondary, like, there are a lot of cultural differences between Omaha and Hawaii, specifically in regards to how we treat people around us.
Mhm. At Creighton, from students from different backgrounds, different states, perhaps different cultures and political beliefs, has the university made any effort to reconcile the fact that people might have different political or ideological beliefs behind mask wearing and social distancing?
I think that, well, they actually right now have a mask mandate on campus. You cannot be inside or outside unless you are in your dorm room without a mask. And I think that I don't know that there is a way that you can reconcile, those different political beliefs in a situation like this. I think that it's very difficult when there are students' lives at stake, students that they are liable for them to say, well, if you personally don't feel like wearing a mask, then we shouldn't make you. And so I think personally, the fact that a mask mandate is required on campus, that they are working in the students' best interests, even if those students might not necessarily understand it themselves.
Mhm. At Creighton, have they made any statements about what the future is going to look like, perhaps later in this semester or next semester, about the structure of classes and perhaps the rules on campus?
Creighton has been especially optimistic, I guess. There are students who believe that we'll be sent home, but the greater Creighton community has overall been very optimistic, along with don't any messages from the administration don't seem to hint to us being sent home or going online. anytime soon. And so they've typically held that we're going to be in person until Thanksgiving, although they are taking precautions, for example, as not having a fall break so people can't go back home and then bring it back to campus. And so because we're losing that fall break, we're getting sent home earlier in like right before Thanksgiving. The day before Thanksgiving is the last day of exams. Um, and the reason for that is that they think that the second wave will correspond with typically when we'll have cold and flu season, when it's going to be much colder here.
Mhm. Are there any regulations about what students are perhaps doing on the weekends, for example? I understand on the mainland it's easier to do things like to do an out-of-state road trip. Has that been occurring on campus? And if so, are there any rules or guidelines regulating students' return back to campus or back to the state?
No, I haven't heard anything about if people go off campus. For example, if a small holiday comes up, Labor Day, for example, comes up, a lot of students will take that opportunity to go off campus. And upon their return, they are not required to get another COVID test unless they personally want to, unless they've had exposure. Um, However, every single day, I guess they're just going to continue with us having to log any symptoms that we might have on an app that they've created, as well as taking our temperature on a daily basis.
Mhm. Have you seen any spikes in the numbers on campus or in the greater community since school resumed for this semester?
If you take a look at the Creighton dashboard, you can see that for a while there were very low cases, but of course that's because there were fewer people on campus. There really weren't all that many for the database to show on there. But as we've come back within the first week that they reported, we had 38 students test positive, as well as 2 faculty, as well as in the second week it was 41 students, I believe, tested positive.
Mhm. And where do you think that the spikes in these cases are coming from, for example? I understand that many colleges have areas such as dining halls, for example. Are those areas in which students are still allowed to sit and perhaps eat and drink without a mask?
No, actually, it gives off a very high school cafeteria, vibe when you walk into the dining hall and it's no longer a serve yourself. You can no longer sit there with your friends. Instead, the only place where you can eat would either be in your dorm, which once again, only people who live in that dorm can go eat with you. Or if you want to have a meal with friends who live in another dorm, you have to do that outside.
Mhm. Have there been any instances of students perhaps being sent home as a result of repeatedly violating the rules?
As of right now, I don't believe so. I also haven't heard any published reports on that at all. However, I have heard that there are some difficulties in securing housing just because they did have to section off quite a bit of housing for isolation in case any students have exposure. And so there are also students who simply don't feel comfortable coming in person. And so they have things like that, I guess. But they also, I guess they don't really publish, I guess, any consequences. So all of that would be by word of mouth. I haven't heard about anyone getting fined yet. All I know is that it's there. They wouldn't, I don't believe, be incredibly open about how many students are violating their rules.
Mhm. You mentioned that some students might feel uncomfortable about the current atmosphere on campus. In such an instance, is there an option for students to be fully online or take hybrid classes?
Overall, professors have been incredibly lenient with that. They have been very understanding that if someone feels either that they might get COVID if they go to class, that they just have to communicate that very well with their professor. I don't think that they have anything that you can take a class fully online asynchronously as we did in the spring, but ultimately, I think professors have definitely understood that some students simply might not feel safe. And so there are always at least a couple of people that are on Zoom, getting the screen recording. And additionally, many professors will post that on their Blue Line, which is the canvas that we use to ensure that any students who weren't able to come to class are able to keep up.
Mhm. Since the campus life is very different now in comparison to previous years, has Creighton created any orientations or programs to help students reacclimate to the new atmosphere on campus?
They definitely had some activities that were clearly meant for social distancing. For example, they'll have movies on the lawn, and so you can sit outside. They gave us a blanket when we first got here so that if we ever needed to sit on the grass to eat dinner with our friends, or if we are sitting on the grass to watch a movie or go to mass, which we do in the soccer stadium, um, they've provided all of those, but it's not explicitly an orientation, I guess. But they also do have their resident advisors be very explicit in what must be done in order to keep the greater community safe.
Mhm. What has been the most stressful part for you at the start of this semester?
I would say that it's just getting acclimated to having everything be online. Um, we had, classes through Blue Line, which once again is how we typically conduct classes, but not lectures. And so that was difficult. But then coming back on campus meant that our extracurriculars were starting up again. And that meant we had to figure out how to make a Zoom call less awkward. That's always going to be the difficulty because it's much harder to gauge body language, to gauge whether someone's actually done with their sentence. So overall, I would say that that's kind of been the hardest part, is getting everything online and getting it to flow smoothly.
Mhm. Do you have any words of advice for any students that might be struggling with coming back to school for the fall 2020 semester?
I would say don't be afraid to lean on your friends. And even if you don't have any close friends, for example, if you're a freshman and you don't know anyone on campus yet, reach out to that person that's in your class. I'm sure they have very similar sentiments to you. This is difficult on everyone. And so we're all kind of going through this together. We are learning how to cope. And as a result, don't be afraid to reach out to anyone if you're having a hard time.
Mhm. This actually wraps up our show for today, Maria, but I just wanted to thank you for taking the time to share your experiences with us and to thank you for watching ThinkTech Hawaii. We hope that today's program shed some light on what life is like as a college student during the fall 2020 semester and how campuses across the nation have been handling the pandemic. I'm Grace Laudick, and I'll see you every other Tuesday at 4. Aloha.